Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another weekly coaching session here with Octopi Poker with myself, Matthew Hunt. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I'm looking forward to bringing you guys another session today. And our topic for the day is going to be how to handle uneven stack sizes. Now, I was originally planning a sort of an intro session, kind of a how to study poker 101 kind of a session thing for this week, but need a little bit more time to prep that one. Need a little bit more energy to be put into slides and preparation and everything. So we're going to push that to next week. And today we're going to cover the idea of uneven stack sizes. Now, this is a topic that I think is quite important to study because obviously in tournaments, you don't see situations where everybody has the exact same stack size unless you're on the first hand of the tournament. So we're going to have to adapt to a little bit of variation there. And I want to kind of introduce some of the key principles that are going to be relevant when we're thinking about doing that. Welcome, Yana and Hostito. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate everybody else in the chat as well. Make sure that while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, all that good stuff, and we'll crack on. We'll move in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sort through some uneven stack sims. We're just going to look at chip EV to begin with. And we're going to start by looking at early position spots. And in particular, we're going to look at situations where we are deeper stacked than everybody else. Because one thing that I just want to illustrate fairly quickly, fairly simply, is what happens when we're playing at a fairly short table and we are fairly deep stacked. Now, the reason why that's going to be pretty simple is simply because we are not really going to have to adapt that much to our stack. We're mostly just going to be able to focus on our opponent's stack sizes. So I'm going to look for any spot where the under the gun player is more than 40 big blinds. And then I'm going to look for a spot where the average stack is, let's say, less than 25 maybe. So we are a bit deeper than everybody else. That's going to be good. We've got one there. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so this is a good one to start with because the average is 18 here, right? And in this spot, we are under the gun. We have 56, and there's a lot of short stacks behind us. We've got 23 there, but we've got 5, 9, 6, 21, 12, 14, right? So I'm going to first of all highlight that one, and then I'm also going to highlight an even stacked situation where we're going to be able to just look at the big picture of what we would be doing, first of all, 50 big blinds deep, but then also, the comparison or for comparison purposes, what we would be doing if, everybody behind us is 20 or 15 big blinds deep. So we'll highlight those as well. So let's hit compare. And this is going to be our first spot here, obviously. So we're all chip EV here, 50 big blinds, 20 big blinds, 15 big blinds. We'll just kind of close these up just to give a basic comparison here. And you can see there's a couple of differences right away between what we do when we are deep and everybody else is shallow compared to when everybody is equally deep, right? The first comparison that jumps out that's the most evident here is when everybody else is shallower. Take a look at what's happening with the suited connector hands here, right? The suited connector hands are basically disappearing altogether from our range. We're not opening 10-8 suited, 9-8 suited, any of these suited connector hands right here. And the simple reason for that is that when everybody else is really shallow, we no longer really have any significant benefit in playing post-flop, right? There's not going to be a lot of post-flop play when everybody's shallow. So we're dropping a lot of these suited connectors out of our range because post-flop play is much less of a concern. We're also dropping out King 8 suited because even though it has a high card, and King 7 suited as well, even though they have high cards, they're not in the territory that we want here, given the stacks behind. In fact, we're also dropping out Ace 3 suited because even being suited is less meaningful there. But what we're doing is we're replacing those with this region over here. We've now got King Jack off in full. There's still a bit of Queen Jack off in there. Ace 10 off is in there in full, and Ace 9 off is in there most of the time as well. So we're replacing those suited connector hands with the offsuit high card hands when everybody around us is shallower. So that's the first thing that is pretty obvious, pretty straightforward there as far as how our opening range is going to change. Now, if we look at a comparison between the uneven stack spot and let's say when everybody else is shallower, well, they start to look a lot similar, right? A lot more similar. When everybody else is 20 big blinds, we don't have those suited connectors in our range very much. There's kind of a little bit of a hybrid here because there is still king 8 suited in there. There is some king jack off, but not all of it. And if we look at 15, well, at 15, we have a very similar looking kind of a range here with a lot of those suited aces and so on kind of coming out of there. Welcome, Tyler. Welcome, Coy Larson. Yeah, this is live weekly, Tyler. Every Friday morning at 10 a.m. We are live here. Yeah, so the comparison here would be that when we're down to 15, obviously everybody being shallower, there's even less post-flop play. So we start to drop out stuff like 10-9 suited, even pocket fives is dropping out. So we have to tighten up just a little bit there, just because that being in position against the big blind kind of a spot is significantly less valuable there. So definitely starting to see that same evolution there when we are early position and we're covering everybody and everybody's pretty shallow. It starts to look a lot more like a shallow stacked spot, right? So that's the first thing. But now what we're going to do is do the inverse. We're going to keep those 15 and 20 big blind spots right there. We're going to get rid of this 50 big blind spot. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for a situation where we are in early position and we are now shorter than everybody else. So we're going to look for stack depth, maybe 35 bigs plus average stack, and we're also going to look for under the gun 8 having between say 10 and 20 bigs. Let's try that, something like that. Okay, so this is with us having 20 and everybody being deeper, or most stacks being deeper. This is us having 12. Yeah, I think this is pretty good. These are some pretty good examples. Let's try this. Let's just try these two, right? So we've got 20 big blinds and we've got 12 bigs. And then we've also got the 20 and the 15 highlighted over here. So that's okay. So this is our first example here. You can see this is just the even stacked 15 big blind sim. We've got the even stacked 20 big blind sim up here. And then our two new ones that we highlighted, we've got under the gun with 20 here. So that's the one we'll start at. We've got these two are the right ones to highlight. We've got under the gun with 20 with everybody having 20, and then under the gun with 20 with a variety of stack sizes behind us here. So we have 17% opening frequency in this 20 big blind even stack sim, and about 16% when everybody is slightly deeper. So not really a huge change there. You can see some slight evolutions. You can see a little bit of some dropping out of these suited connector hands. That could be because specifically the big blind is a bit shallower here. So that might be having an impact. But as you can see, when everybody else is covering us, there's not really a big difference here, right? There's not really a substantial difference in the effective stack. So we can actually start to use these 20 big blind opening ranges quite effectively. We start to see that the strategies and the overall approaches relating to the players behind us look pretty consistent. So now if we look at the other two that we've got this 15 big blinds under the gun, and then this I guess is 12, so probably should have loaded up a different one here. Let me see if I can go back and find our 12 big blind even stacked sim. So we want down there. There's our 12 big blind sim. Let's get rid of that 15. There we go. Okay. So we're comparing 12 big blinds even stacks with 12 big blinds uneven stacks. And if you look at the strategies here, there's again a very, very similar looking strategy. The only slight difference with the uneven stacks is that we are a little bit less inclined to shove certain hands, but it is very much similar. We've got maybe the uneven stacked, we're actually now able to shove fours, and we're not shoving like ace-5 suited. We are shoving ace-5 suited and fours. We weren't shoving ace-5 suited in the even stacked sim. So there's some slight evolutions there, but also note that the even stacked sim does have a limping option here, which is going to slightly alter things, but really you can see when everybody's covering us or when the stacks are uneven and we're pretty short, everything is staying pretty consistent here. We're not really seeing a huge change from the uneven stacked sims. So when we're talking about short stacks, when we're talking about, either everybody has us covered or we have everybody else covered, the opening ranges certainly start to seem pretty similar, right? We're not going to see massive evolutions there. But when we go into 3-bet ranges and calling ranges, that's going to change quite a bit. So GoFish 2816 sent a coaching inquiry for you on Octopi. Okay, thank you. I haven't received that, but I'll check that out. If that doesn't go through, I'll make sure that I figure that out with somebody. If you want to contact me on Discord as well, that's probably the easiest thing. You can find me through the Octopi Discord. We can definitely get set up through there. So thank you for that. So the next thing is going to be to start looking at some responses against an open, right? Because naturally, these are where some of the areas start to really look a bit different, right? We start to see some very different strategies. So what I want to first of all highlight is a spot where we are facing an open from a shallow stack and we have a deeper stack, right? Because I think these are areas that players tend to get quite wrong. So we're going to look at an early position open with maybe, let's try to find something where under the gun 8 has exactly 15 or so. Async Erica, thank you. I appreciate that. Really appreciate that. I try to, really put effort into making things intelligible, so I'm glad to hear that. So we're going to look at, so let's find, okay, where we are. We need a deeper stacked one. Okay, this is pretty good. All right, so we've got 30 big blind average and 15 big blinds under the gun, right? And we're now going to look at comparing that against the even stacked 15 big blind sim. Oh, actually, this is even better. Let's look at 50 big blinds where 15 big blinds is under the gun. So let's do that. And then we've got to find the 15 big blind even. Okay. So this is pretty good. So what we've got here, at the top, we've got the uneven stacked sim. At the bottom, we've got the even stacked. And in both cases, under the gun has 15 big blinds. Now, we're going to have under the gun open to 2 bigs in both cases. And right away, there's a couple of pretty meaningful and interesting things. If we look at under the gun 7 here with the uneven stacks, when they have 69 big blinds, so they have a deep stack here, obviously they are not really able to shove all in, right? They're not really going to be able to just play a reshove strategy. We've got, with the 15 big blind stack, they are pretty much playing shove or fold here. There's no flatting. They're not really able to, to kind of do anything to play post flop here. So they're just shoving or they're folding. But when we look at the response at deeper stacks, the fact that the under the gun 7 player can't shove all in is changing the response quite a bit. Instead of the shove, we now have a 3-bet to either the small size or the bigger size here. And we also have a tiny bit of flatting. Now the flatting is not really particularly consequential here, so we can pretty much just eliminate that for the most part. And we also don't even really have to worry that much about the small 3-bet here either. In fact, by far the most useful part of the strategy is this 6.75 3-bet. It's a bigger 3-bet. And this, I think, is where players get this a little bit wrong. It's that they try to focus a fair amount on making sure that they have, there's the perception that they can be 3-bet folding against this opening range. Whereas it's not really that important to kind of convey the possibility of 3-bet folding when the opener is already very shallow stacked. In fact, what you benefit a lot from is 3-betting to a pretty large size and more or less conveying to the opener that they are never going to have any fold equity if they shove, right? Solo Morgie, yes, okay. I'm on the Octopi Discord. I'm just Poker Fluency on Discord. If you just add me, we can definitely discuss it. You can also go to my personal coaching website. I don't want to plug it too much on the Octopi channel, but it's pokerfluency.com /call. If you go to my website there, you can book a call to discuss some coaching. So either way, whatever you want to do is all good. So the larger 3-bet size here is what's happening. We're kind of just committing to being all in against the short stack to deny some equity. And if you want to think about it in these terms, it's actually more or less coming from a very similar range to what the shoving range would from the short stack down here. And we're not actually shoving, but we're basically kind of committing to play for stacks against the opener. We're taking, this sort of 5-6% range, and we're just 3-betting to a big size and not folding to the opener. Sorry to backtrack, but in the 12 big blind sim, all weak offsuit hands and weak suited hands that are raising 2x, they're just folding to aggression. Yeah, they will be. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, once you face aggression at 12 big blinds, if you have like a weak offsuit hand, yeah, you're gonna ditch it. Like, you're not gonna face aggression from too much of a from too much of a weak range there. I do think though that most of the time, once you face aggression at that stack size, like, your hand is gonna just dictate one way or the other, based on the position that you face. Most of the time, like, you're gonna have a pretty clear sense of, like, do I have enough equity to be continuing against aggression there? So when it comes to this specific spot, you can see that the biggest mistake players are going to make here, or the biggest thing that players are going to get wrong, is just playing this small 3-bet quite a lot, and also playing like too much calling here, and not just kind of diverting to this large 3-bet kind of commit against the short stack sort of mentality here. Now, if we were to look at how the button is going to play, instead of looking at how the under the gun 7 player is going to play, there is a little bit of flatting starting to happen now, because the button has obviously a bit more of a positional edge. And in fact, the range is really not substantially different. You can see that the flatting range that happens at 15 big blind even stacks is very, very similar to the flatting range that happens on the button here in this deep stack spot. So as we get closer to the button, it starts to get closer to the point where our strategy seems, fairly similar to what it would be if we were much shallower. Except now you can see that the all-in is getting replaced by this large 3-bet. So we're just 3-betting to a size that we're never folding if they get it in. But obviously we're going to get a lot of folds to the 3-bet to begin with. And if we do get shoved on, we're getting a fine price to call it off. So in fact, we just end up playing kind of similarly to what we would do if we had that short stack. It's just that the shove gets replaced by a fairly large 3-bet, right? So that is quite a significant part of this equation, that we're always just playing against the opener here. We're not really that concerned about the stacks behind us, other than we're not going to want to just shove because we're risking too much in the event that one of them wakes up with a good hand. So the opener stack is much more important here than the stacks behind us. That's going to be quite significant, quite relevant here. So that's the second thing here about when we're facing a short stack open. Now what I want to do is look at when we are facing a deeper stacked open. I'm just going to reset everything here because it's going to be necessary to do that. I'm going to look at when we're facing a deeper stacked open. So we're at a relatively deep stack table, but maybe we have short stacks behind us. So we're deeper stacked against the opener, but the players behind are fairly short. So we're going to say under the gun 8 is going to open. They're going to be at least 30 bigs. Under the gun 7 is also going to be at least 30 bigs here. But maybe we're going to have players behind that are a bit shallower. So we're just going to sort right there. Let's take a look at, let's see if we can find some good ones. Okay, so we've got a few examples of some shorter stacks there. We've got, okay, this is a pretty good one. This is a good one. This is a good one. That is, oh, this is a pretty good one as well. And that's also a good one. So we've got a nice few examples there. We're just going to load up a few of the even stacked sims just to have some good comparisons there. And we'll kind of have to, kind of have to just minimize some of these ones. Is there a good cheat sheet, more or less, when we should be 3-betting larger than that in position compared to more of a 2.5x raise? Not really. it just comes down to stack sizes, really. Like if you're in a position like that where you're shallow enough that you can't 3-bet fold to the opener no matter what, then 3-bet a little bit bigger. But when it comes to going a little bit closer towards 3x, mostly that's going to be for situations where you're fairly deep, but you're not necessarily you're not necessarily like deep enough that you have to 3-bet big in order to get stacks in. You just want to think of it in terms of giving your opponent tough decisions. If you are fairly deep and you're 3-betting really small, well, they're going to have a lot of fairly easy calls, and you're not going to really be able to get stacks in. If you're fairly shallow, then sometimes going really small, like we saw in the previous examples, might actually not be ideal because they get to just call, try to flop some equity, and see if they go with it. So it's going to be flexible from one spot to another. But when you're thinking about the difference between 2.5x and 3x, that's a really, really small difference. So it's just not really going to have much impact one way or the other. As long as you don't go like 2.2x in a spot where you're supposed to go 3x, or you're going 3.5x in a spot where you're supposed to go 2.5, it's not going to have a huge impact. The specifics and the nuances of 3-bet sizes like that, as long as you're not going too extreme, it just isn't going to actually have that much impact on your EV. So I wouldn't sweat that one too much. So what we want to find now is I want to find situations where we have a deeper open. Let's get rid of these first two here. We're going to look at a deeper open situation, and we're going to be facing an open with short stacks behind. So I'm going to look at a spot like this. Under the gun 7 is going to open, and we're in the low jack with 60 or 63-ish. And we've got quite a few shallower stacks behind. So now I'm going to compare this to our chip EV 60 big blind scenario. So chip EV 60 bigs is here, under the gun 7 versus low jack. So I can't quite fit them on screen at the same time here, but I'll try. At the top here with the uneven stack spot, and then at the bottom with the even stack spot, we've got. In the even stacks, we've got 5 and 7% as the call in 3-bet, and we've got 6 and 6% in the uneven stacks. So all that's really happening is a slight change to the flatting range, a little bit more flatting, not a massive amount. But because the stacks behind us, even though there's 5 players left to act behind us here, when we're talking about early position against early position, they're going to have to fold quite a bit. So there's not going to be a huge amount of spots that occur where we're going to play some sort of multi-way or some sort of spot against these players behind us one way or the other, even when we're a little bit deeper here. So ultimately, we're not seeing big changes, and we're not going to see a massive transformation here as far as our middle position strategy, because like I mentioned before, the opening stack, or the stack of the opener, is the most important stack here. It's the most important stack as far as the EV that we're gaining here. It's going to be mostly coming from that player. So we're not going to see a massive change there in these early position spots. If I find a spot that is maybe more of a late position situation, let's see if we can see anything different here. We've got, this one was, okay, so this is 41, 46. It's not quite what I was looking for. This one, this is kind of what I was looking for. Okay, so we've got, in this case, we've got under the gun 8 and buttons. So we're going to focus on this deep stack spot here, right? Because the button here has 53 big blinds here behind them, but they also have an 8 big blind stack in the big blind. So compare this to 80 big blinds even stacks. We start to see a couple of differences. So there we go. So right away, there's a couple things. Are we considering bounties in this scenario, says Southern Morgie? No, this is just chip EV. This is not related to bounties at all. We actually don't have any bounty sims up on Octopi yet. We're a little bit more live poker focused, so obviously bounty events are they're very much an online focused thing. They're very much kind of in the territory of, if you're playing a lot of the main online sites, you're obviously going to be playing a lot of PKOs and bounty events. Live stuff is more mystery bounty focused if we're talking about live bounty events, and obviously those are a little bit trickier to solve for, but I do think at some point we will get some of those in the archive there. It's just a question of resources and how we're going to be able to structure the sims as they go up. So the main thing that we're looking at here with this deep stack spot, we've got 80 bigs even stacks at the bottom, and then we've got 75-ish uneven at the top. And what you can see is that the presence of this shorter stack, this big blind, 8 big blind stack, is actually restricting the button's ability to flat quite a bit. We've got 14% here flatting range compared to 18% in the even stack spot. So there's a lot of hands there, like some of those suited kings, they're starting to drop out. There's a lot of these suited hands like the 6-4, 5-3 suited, they're starting to drop out. So there's definitely a tighter range there. There's definitely some stuff that would normally be continuing that is no longer continuing when the stacks are uneven here. So that's quite a significant factor in this. It's quite a meaningful thing that even when we're deep, if we have shorter stacks behind us, because of the fact that when we call, we're going to see stuff like this. We're going to see, for example, the big blind jamming 12% of the time. When the big blind jams, under the gun is going to either call or they're going to re-raise, decent frequency here. That is certainly going to be a major factor that is slightly decreasing the button's ability to flat quite so wide here. So that is a pretty meaningful, pretty significant thing there when we're talking about deeper stacks in a situation like this, or in a formation like this. So that is one element that we certainly have to be mindful of. Now I'm going to go back to the sim selector here and just kind of unselect all the ones that I've already selected, because I want to clear everything up a little bit. And what I want to now put a little bit of energy into is squeezing ranges. So I want to particularly highlight that the way that we play certain situations at, let's say, 20, 25, 30 big blinds can be very different when we're up against deeper stacks than when we are up against shallower. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to highlight 25 big blinds here, and we're going to start with that even stacked sim. Actually, we're going to highlight 25 and 30. And then what I'm going to do is find a spot where particularly the small blind is going to have between 25 and 35 big blinds. And we're then going to find a spot where maybe, let's say, a low jack opens from 40 big blinds or deeper, and then a button flats from 40 big blinds or deeper. So this is probably going to be, this is probably going to be good. I think what I'll do is also just make that between 20 and 30 instead. So there we go. Okay, so these are some pretty good spots for us here. We've got the 25 and the 30 big blinds selected already. We're going to go with this one. We're going to go with this one. Maybe this one as well. Yeah, we'll just look at a few of these actually. Just look at these first 4. So the notable line that I'm going to be looking at here is low jack open and then button call, and we're in the small blind, right? So we're taking note of our shoving range and our 3-bet range from the small blind here. At 25 bigs, we have 8% shove. We have some calls, and we have a 6.5 3-bet as well. So we have a bit of a non-all-in 3-bet with kind of a polarized range there. And then at 30 bigs, it's going to look pretty similar. Low jack open, button call, and we're in the small blind. Similar sort of a strategy. All-in shove, polarized 3-bet, and then a call as well. So that is, kind of our starting point here. And ditch the 30 there just to make sure. What we now have, or what I now want to look at, is let's find something where we have about 25 in the small blind. Okay, this is a good one. Yeah, this is the right one. Okay, so we're going to look at, let's try to just make it so they're all visible. Okay, cool. So we're going to look at low jack open off 46. So they are opening about 20%. Button here is now going to flat, and small blind is, action is now on small blind, right? So there's a couple of things that are very different here, right? If you look at the top range, which is even stacks, 25 bigs, compared to the bottom range, which is uneven stacks, with the small blind having 25 or 26. The first thing is that the non-all-in 3-bet has actually pretty much disappeared. And the reason for that is to do with what happens when that 3-bet takes place. It's because if we make that non-all-in 3-bet here against two players, it's now significantly harder at this stack depth for us to get through both of these opponents, because of the fact that we're no longer in that position where, the original raiser might just shove over our 3-bet. It's a lot harder to get through both of them when, maybe they are kind of a bit cautious about getting chips in against each other. There ends up being a bit more passiveness. So we're not really going to use that all-in 3-bet very much. If we look at the non-all-in 3-bet, if we look at the response to it at depth here, when they are a bit deeper, when we 3-bet to 7.4, the low jack does a certain amount of calling, but they also do a lot of folding, and they shove sometimes. But if they fold, the button just does a lot of getting it in. There's a little bit more of the calling there, but not a ton, right? And then in the 25 big blind sim, well, now they're getting it in 28% of the time. Actually, that's pretty consistent right there. And then button, they are doing a bit more calling here. They're not just reshoving quite as often. So there's a slight change in how those ranges look. So the non-all-in 3-bet is not as big of a part of our strategy when the other two players are deeper. And in fact, we're also doing less calling as well, because we're now just kind of shifting more towards a bit more of a shove or fold kind of an approach. So we're not going to have as much room to realize equity when these two players are playing a bit deeper against each other. They kind of protect each other against us. It's harder for us as the out of position player when they're deeper against each other. And crucially here, the preflop raise is also slightly bigger. It's a 2.3x here instead of a 2x. And that also shifts us more in favor of wanting to just be all in preflop a lot. And that's kind of the direction that our strategy starts to go in. So that non-all-in 3-bet starts to disappear. We just basically play shove with a little bit of calling and then a lot of folding. And if we look at a similar version here, we'll see some similar dynamics. We've got low jack open here. Oops. Low jack open, button call at 50-ish. Oops. And then small blind again here. Not a lot of non-all-in 3-bet at 28 bigs. Just doing a lot of shoving and some calling, and not really, very much non-all-in 3-betting there at all. So very similar sort of a dynamic. When the other two stacks are quite deep, we have less incentive to make that non-all-in 3-bet, because we don't induce as much of the right kinds of action. We don't induce quite as much shoving, and we're also up against some slightly sort of differently constructed ranges here. So that's kind of pretty meaningful there. And as far as the low jack strategy goes, in response to our shove, let's say, at 25 bigs, they're supposed to call it off here with 32% of their opening range, sevens plus, ace 10 suited plus, ace jack off plus. In this particular spot, it's going to be, because they're forced to reshove instead of just being able to call, they're actually forced to risk all of their 47 bigs or so. They are only getting it in with eights plus, and ace jack suited, and ace queen off. And this is kind of what's creating this incentive for us to shove more. It's that the original raiser actually has to fold slightly more because they're a bit scared of being trapped by the button. So when that's the case, it allows us to shove just a little bit more here because they have to be, slightly cautious. If they do fold, the button still has plenty of calls here, sevens plus, ace jack suited, ace jack off. And the same is probably going to be true. Yeah, they actually call, sixes plus, ace 10 suited here when we're looking at 25 big blinds, even stacks. So generally, we're shifting more towards shove or fold when stacks are uneven and we're in a position like that. So that's another key sort of an element here that's going to be quite relevant. Is this uploaded later on YouTube or to a Discord channel? It just stays on YouTube. It's just on this YouTube channel, so the replay will be up forever. We've got a whole archive of the previous sessions that we've done. We've got, a whole playlist on the YouTube channel there that are going to be relevant there with, for the Octopi user base. So if you want to go back and check out some of our previous sessions, obviously feel free. So the next thing, or the final thing that I want to start to take a look at here, is what happens when we have a micro stack in play. Now we have, I believe, talked about this maybe one time before, I think, in some of these spots for you guys. So some of you may be familiar with what I'm going to go through. What do we got? No worries, Tyler. All good. See you soon. Tyler is a student of mine, for you guys out there who don't know Tyler. He's a very hard worker. Glad to see him in the chat right there. So what I want to focus in on is, let's try to look at a spot where the big blind is really, really shallow, right? Where we've got some kind of a really shallow stack behind us. And let's try to pick out something where we're fairly deep overall. Okay, so this one is going to be good. So this is 46 big blind average. We're going to look at, let's just compare that to a 50 big blind even stacked sim. I'm going to go sorting right there. So 50 big blind even compared to this one where there's a micro stack in the big blind. So we're going to look at the under the gun 8 and under the gun 7 strategies here. In the even stack spot, it goes raise to 2.3, and then under the gun 7 is going to have this, fairly tight strategy, but kind of a merged 3-bet range right there. But take a look at, some of the change that's happened already here when we've got this micro stack in the big blind. There's a lot more of a focus on flatting here. There's a lot more flatting, 6% compared to 4%. It flips. It goes from 6% 3-bet and 4% flat to the other way around. And if we look at some of the other players, if we look at, let's say, the button here, the button is heavily favoring flatting now, 11% to 4%, when there's a micro stack in the blinds. And there's a specific reason for that. If we look at, comparing the responses, they are at 16 compared to 6% in the other version here. But we start to see more and more differences when we look at more players being involved in the pot here. Because take a look at now what's happening after the button calls. We've got completely different responses, right? At the bottom, where everybody has 50 bigs, the button is flatting, 16%, and then the small blind is calling 10%, 3-betting 6%, and occasionally doing a tiny bit of shoving. But at the top, when the button flats, which they're only doing 11% now, but they are still doing it a fair amount, the small blind is never 3-betting anything. They are literally playing no 3-bets whatsoever. Hey, thanks for free content. No worries. Happy to oblige. The small blind is literally never 3-betting in this spot. And you might be wondering, well, why would that be? Well, the answer comes in the form of what happens if they do call. Because take a look. In the even stacked version, if they call, there's 8.9 big blinds in the pot. And the big blind is still pretty deep. So the big blind is either going to call quite a bit, or they're going to 3-bet sometimes, but they're only shoving 2%, and they're 3-betting non-all-in 6% of the time. So the re-raise doesn't come in very often. But when the big blind only has 5 bigs, and there's 8.9 big blinds out there, take a look at how aggressive they are. They're just getting an incredible price to be all in for their last 4 big blinds and try to win all that money that's out there. So they are just getting it in with 77% of hands. They're getting it in super, super wide here. And when they do, it creates this kind of chain reaction where no player wants to sort of reopen the pot and just shut the other players out if they have the potential to perhaps trap and keep them in, right? So here you get this under the gun 8 player who is still a little bit cautious about the button and the small blind, and so they're not playing any re-raises at all here when the big blind shoves, under the gun 8 now has to just call. And then the button, they still have to worry about the small blind because the small blind is flatting with all of those trappy hands, right? Remember, the small blind was never 3-betting in this spot. The small blind was playing a trap-only strategy, basically. So the button can't really isolate and try to take this pot down uncontested or just go heads up against the big blind either. So the button has to just call quite a lot. And then the small blind gets to sort of spring the trap, so to speak. And there's now 18 big blinds in the pot, and they have the ability to shove. They have the ability to re-raise to 15, and they also do still have some calls, so they never have to fold anything. So Coy Larson says, if big blind shoves with 5 big blinds, the undergun is free to re-raise as he pleases, then the button's in a hard position. Well, the whole thing about it, right, is that the under the gun is free to re-raise, but because the small blind is playing this strategy of they are never 3-betting anything here, right? The small blind knows that if they call, the big blind's going to go all in at a really high frequency. So the small blind can still have aces here. The small blind can still have kings, queens, ace, king, all of these good hands. So in fact, the under the gun player can't just re-raise as they please here because they have to worry about the fact that the small blind can just wake up with all those good hands. The small blind can still have all of those hands at a pretty decent rate here. The small blind is protecting their flatting range because they know that shove is going to come so frequently. And that forces the under the gun player to not re-raise here, to kind of, it's a higher EV play here to either to sort of play call or fold and let the small blind sort of potentially re-raise so that the under the gun player can trap. So basically it becomes this game of everybody trying to trap everybody else. Everybody wants to be the last one to put money in. And you can see the button here isn't even really re-raising very much. There's a little bit of it, but there's not a lot. And when the button calls, now the small blind is able to put money back in the pot. They're raising to 15 a lot of the time. They're shoving some. And when they do raise to 15, now under the gun 8, even then, under the gun 8 doesn't actually re-raise very often with aces. They still just trap. So there's still even more trapping going on. It's just everybody's trying to trap everybody constantly. And now there's still endless trapping here, right? So it goes raise, trap, trap, shove, trap, and then a trap again, small blind re-raises, under the gun 8 traps for a third time, and now it comes back around to the button, and the button occasionally is trapping for a third time here. Now, they're not trapping that often because they don't have a lot of aces and stuff to begin with, but they do still have like queens in this spot sometimes, right? And yeah, the small blind is a big part of the equation, right? The small blind is definitely a big element of this. If the small blind doesn't play that trap strategy, then it changes a lot of stuff, right? It's going to really change a lot of the variables here. So that's quite important. But you can really see, the button is now, they're playing call here, and you go to the flop, 51 big blinds in the pot, 32 big blinds in the under the gun stack. So it's kind of a crazy sort of 4-way spot with an all-in player. But it very much is, this is supposed to happen sometimes here. You are supposed to see a lot of this trapping, a lot of these kinds of weird strategies that take place when you've got this micro stack in the big blind. So these micro stack dynamics are very much a, kind of a weird part of this equation that you have to take into account when you're talking about uneven stacks and you're talking about what are the things we have to take into account that wouldn't exist when we're just playing a regular kind of even stack spot. Because this trapping never happens in these even stack spots, right? When the big blind 3-bets to a normal size here, you do see some trapping. There's like the aces there, but then once that trap comes in, there's not really a lot of trapping going on from the button because they're facing a much bigger 3-bet here. And then the small blind has no real traps. The small blind just almost always folds here. And we just basically almost never go to a flop 4 ways in a situation like this. So going to a flop 4 ways in a 3-bet pot just isn't really something that's supposed to happen very much. So very important to kind of watch out for some of these dynamics that exist when there's a micro stack in there. So really interesting spot. I like studying those ones because those are ones that do come up in real gameplay, and they do make a difference. So definitely interesting. So I think that is a good spot to wrap it for today. We've gone our usual 45 minutes. So I appreciate you guys being here. That will be our closing point for today. Obviously, if you want to participate in our challenges on Discord, our GTO challenges, please do go ahead and get yourself logged into our Discord server. You can find the link to the Discord on the main Octopi page. If you go back to the homepage and scroll down, we've got this little Discord icon at the bottom here. You can click that and it'll take you right to our Discord server. And if you want to participate in those challenges, you'll be able to get some daily drills and daily exercises to do to keep your game sharp. And hopefully I will see you guys next week, where we will most likely be doing a sort of general how to study poker kind of session, where the goal is just going to be to really teach you guys how to get the most out of your Octopi study processes. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate all of you. And I will see you all very soon. If you have any questions, obviously reach me on the Discord, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.